Dear Kafir, thank you so much for your response to my last letter. I'm honored that you would listen to my advice, and I think you will be very pleased with players' responses when the changes are implemented. In particular, it seems like the Last Day on Earth community is ecstatic about the changes you are hoping to make with the motorcycle gas tank. It seems almost unanimous that the solution you chose out of the options I suggested will not only fix the problem, but it is the favorite option of the community. I know you have not been able to implement this change or even set a date yet, but we all look forward to when it will happen. It also seems like you took some of my advice when designing the 4th floor of the bunker. Having an objective-based 4th floor with the new environmental challenges has added diversity and has even created debate in the community on what is the best way to complete the bunker floor. I love this. I love the challenge and I love the diversity, so I think you did a great job. Much of the rest of the community is not as excited as I am about the 4th floor, but I don't think this is because of the way it is designed. Rather, I believe this is because the current reward for completing the 4th floor isn't really worth it. I would suggest adding a few steel bars in the chest of this room. I know you've been hesitant to introduce too much steel in the game, but even a small max base would cost 3,500 steel. So if you give 5 or even 10 steel every 2 days, it would not flood the economy. The last change I suggested making was to reevaluate your scaling of oak and steel. In response to this, you mentioned that you would be adding the new oak clearing event. This has been an amazing way for players that do not yet have their motorcycle to get oak. This consequently makes the gas tank less essential, thus further helping the first problem I addressed in my last letter. I think this is where we might have had a miscommunication. I'm glad y'all added the oak clearing event, and I know that non-motorcycle owners are very happy about it, but that is actually not the problem that I was referring to in my letter. The numbers that I was showing you in that letter were actually for people that owned motorcycles. Oak is 25 to 40 times harder to gather even for those of us who have access to the oak zones. And while the oak clearing event is a little closer to us, it has a lot less trees and roughly the same amount of enemies per tree. After a little bit of research, the research team almost unanimously concluded that it is easier to get oak from the oak zones, which means that the oak clearing event offers no respite to the problem that I mentioned in that video. Oak and steel still demand a ridiculous grind to acquire. I think this is a bigger problem than even the gas tank. If you make something difficult, people are going to complain. But in a well-balanced game, when players complain, the most advanced players, the players that are most efficient at playing the game, say, no, it's not that bad. You just need to get better at the game. Here, watch this video on how to do a better job. And it stops people from complaining because they know someone else is going to say, well, actually, it's because you're just not good enough at the game. But since Last Day on Earth is not well balanced right now, when players complain, the advanced players say, well, you're right. In fact, I calculated it, and even if you grind every day, it's going to take you 4 years to get that. Those who complain now have free rein to complain as much as they want because they know that everyone will agree with them and the community around your game becomes increasingly toxic. This has happened with Last Day on Earth, and most of the advanced players are not there to stop it because they have either quit the game or they're not actively playing that much. Because I've played Last Day on Earth for 9 months and because of how Grim Soul Survival is currently, I still very much believe in you guys. I believe that you guys have a plan to make all of this make sense one day, but since I don't know that plan, I can't combat the toxic atmosphere of this game. All I have to offer is my unbridled optimism. If you guys can't reveal your plan yet of why you made oak and steel such a grind to acquire, then I would again strongly recommend that you lower the requirements now and then raise them again when it makes sense why you are doing it. This last update with breeding dogs has increased the negativity around Last Day on Earth, which is extremely frustrating because it is actually an amazing update. I can tell how much thought you put into it, but it was not received that way. Now, part of this is because there was a rumor that spread that we all bought into that you have to spend money every time you want your dog to fight for you. Now that I have a dog, by using the data clear trick, I realize that your dog resets every time you return to your base. So I think the way you set up the dog is great. However, the main reason this update was not received well by most of the community is because when we crunched the numbers, we realized that it would take breeding hundreds of rank 1 dogs to get one dog that will go with us, which will take probably over a year of grinding. Now, I've noticed that you guys like to make things almost impossible in the beginning and then make them less difficult as time goes on, which I think is really smart. It's smart as a business model because all of the pay-to-play and pay-to-win players will spend extra money to try to be the first ones to get the desired item. It's also smart to start out an update really difficult from a developer's point of view because players always respond better when you make a game easier rather than make it harder. And so if the rest of the game was balanced, I think it would be easier for players to assume that you would eventually change it to where it makes sense. But because steel and oak still require such a grind to the point that very few players are willing to do it, and almost no players have fun doing it because there isn't a sense of satisfaction to it, players are assuming that this too is a broken update and that most of them will never actually get the dog. And what is even more frustrating is that I think you missed the most beautiful part of this update for you guys. I know you guys want to keep us entertained for a while, and I know you want to make money, and I want you guys to make money. But I don't think the dog that follows you was where you should have tried to make the money, or tried to keep us entertained. That is what everyone wants, so it makes sense that you'd focus on that. But I think you would have made a lot more money if you had made it proportional for 3 reasons. The first one is that pay-to-play and pay-to-win players don't want people to know that they are pay-to-win and pay-to-play. Many of them will tell you if you ask, but they like it when it's not obvious. They like it when some people think they just got lucky, or they think that they worked hard for it. The second reason is because your pay-to-win and pay-to-play players still have an expectation of what is reasonable to spend. If they spend $100 on dogs only to find out that they would need to spend an average of $800 to get one dog that follows you, they're going to feel pretty trashy about spending that $100 and might not ever spend it again. But the third reason is the most important. This update has the potential of making you money forever and have your players be happy about it. You see, if you had made it to where instead of taking an average of a year or 2 to get a dog with a true friend trait, you made it to where it was just an average of a month, then your players would have praised you for such an amazing and reasonable update. Your free-to-play players would happily get to work to earn their dogs, and your pay-to-win players would just buy them for like $80 or something, which would make them happy with their purchase, and no one would shame them because the dog did not seem otherwise unattainable. And everyone would be happy. But then players would start thinking, oh wait, I don't want a dog with just 5 attack. I want to get 4 dogs with the leadership plus 5 ability so that I can have a dog with 25 attack, which would take months and months of grinding and buying dogs to get there. But no one would get frustrated on how hard that is or complain because it is the goal of an overachiever. And then after several months, when you want a spike in sales, you simply add an update with a new buff that will increase how many times your dog can attack, or lets your dog get a sneak attack when you get a sneak attack. The programming demand of adding new abilities would be relatively minimal, but the financial outcome would be incredible, and the possibilities would be endless. I know that it might be really hard to take my word for this since I'm just some random YouTuber, but there are a ton of really good books and articles that back up what I'm saying. I hope you read some of them because my fear right now is that if you do not heed this advice, you will push some of your most committed players to the point that they will leave and never return, even after the beta is over. I believe that you have a great plan that will make it make sense one day, but if you end up developing a bad reputation before you get a chance to implement your plan, then those players may never give your plan a decent chance. I've come up with some suggestions for you guys of what balance changes I think you should make. You can, of course, fix the same problems using a different approach, but I assure you that I put a lot of effort in these suggestions, and I removed all the suggestions that were motivated by my personal playstyle, so that the only suggestions remaining are the ones that will address the problems most commonly brought up by the community. The first 2 suggestions are to make it to where 1 oak wood makes 1 oak plank, and to where level 3 walls only cost 5 oak planks. I explained my reasons for this more fully in my other video. This will still make level 3 walls 4 times more difficult to build than they were before update 1.6. My next 4 suggestions mainly have to do with steel. By reducing the smelting times of these materials or increasing the effectiveness of charcoal, it will greatly diminish the amount of grinding for pine necessary to get 1 steel bar. I suggest making copper a tad easier to obtain. I recommend adding 5 to 10 steel bars to the chest to the 4th floor, or 10 to 20 steel bars in the chest spread throughout Bunker Alpha. And then I recommend increasing the time it takes to turn steel into a plate in order to force players to think ahead of time and prepare. I recommend reintroducing the Shipwreck and Smuggler's Camp as once-a-month events. You've already developed them, why not make them a rare event? I recommend making an electronic circuit a guaranteed item in a floppy disk location, and maybe adding it in one more place. I recommend changing it to where the only benefit of the true friend trait is to let you open doors and that any rank 4 dog can travel with you. I am confident that if you do it this way, you will make a lot more money and your player base will be a lot happier with you. I was going to suggest lowering the cost of food of feeding your pets, but after an almost tragic event today, I realized that my dogs will not die or run away if I don't feed them. Still a little disturbing to let them sit there without food, but I couldn't keep up with the cost of feeding them, and I'm really glad they didn't run away. Lastly, I would suggest making 2 changes that will make the game harder. Please do not make these changes unless you also make a lot of the changes I mentioned earlier. The first one is to fix the data clear trick. Obviously, this trick is destructive because it has caused a lot of players to lose their accounts, which then in turn makes you guys look bad. But if this trick is not fixed, it will allow people to get unlimited breeding of their dogs, which would cut into the profits that I was talking about earlier. The second one is motivated by one of your other games. After playing Grimsoul Survival, I have realized that the trick of closing out of your game when dying to avoid losing all of your stuff is really destructive to Last Day on Earth in the long run. Don't get me wrong, I have loved using it, but after months of doing it, I'm not really that worried about dying anymore. The adrenaline rush that I used to experience when I first started playing the game is all but gone. I'm realizing that the feeling of showing up at your house naked and having lost everything on you is a really important feeling to this game because it creates suspense and because it creates worth. So I recommend changing it to where the game instantly saves as soon as you die, just like it does in Grimsoul Survival. However, please do not do this if you do not also change the ratios that I mentioned earlier, because currently in the game there is very little to no satisfaction when you farm for higher level resources. So if you reintroduce the pain of coming home with nothing and don't reintroduce the satisfaction of coming home with a good load, then it will not have a good effect on the community. I don't know if I can predict the effect that it will have on the community, but I'm almost positive that it will not be a good one. However, if you make all of these changes, I am confident that the Last Day on Earth community will feel like you are listening and the toxic atmosphere will decrease immensely. My last video like this one got more likes and shares per view than any other video I have ever made. I think this video might even get more likes and shares because it addresses even more of the concerns of your players. But more importantly, it addresses the concerns of your most advanced players, the ones that are the most skilled and most efficient at playing your game. If you are not able to keep the hearts of those players, then your game will eventually be overrun by a toxic environment because it is the advanced players that can keep the complainers in check. I hope this letter helps you guys as you develop your game that is in beta. Sincerely, Fuerza.